We are going to be going over questions from the Topic 26 Skills Test. So the first example says, find the surface area of the following figure. Use 3.14 for pi. Round answers to the nearest hundredth if necessary. Do not include units in your answer. And every problem will ask about the same thing. It'll just depend on if it's surface area or volume. So this time I know I am finding surface area. And this figure is a cylinder. I know that because it has two circular bases. And then I have one lateral face that's curved around those two bases. So my formula for surface area of a cylinder is 2 pi RH plus 2 pi r squared. And so my first step is that I just need to plug things in where they go. I can see that my radius is 4, my height, distance between both bases is 6. So I plug in 3.14 for pi. I plug in 4 for the radius for r and 6 for the height. Now looking at what I have at this point, I can see that I have a square. And we always have to take care of exponents before we multiply or add. So I'm going to rewrite everything else the same, but now where I see 4 squared, instead I'm going to have 16. So lots of work to show here. And then once I have that, I see that I have multiplication and addition. I do multiplication in order of operations before addition. So I'm going to multiply my sets of numbers together. My first set, I'm taking 2 times 3.14 times 4 times 16, which gives me 150.72. And then with my second set of numbers, I have 2 times 3.14 times 16, which gives me 100.48. Now I still have addition, so my last step is that I add my numbers together, and my surface area is going to be 251.2. And since that's already to the nearest tenth, I don't have to round it, so I get 251.2 yards squared as my answer. Okay, the next question is very similar to this, but instead of giving us the radius, we can see that it gives us a diameter. So we're still finding surface area. I still have two bases, so I know it's a cylinder. So I'm going to use the same formula as last time. SA equals 2 pi RH plus 2 pi r squared. And then I plug variables in where they go. So pi we're replacing with 3.14. Now r they don't give us. They give us the diameter. But if the diameter is 7, the radius is half of that. So the radius is 3.5 and the height is 10. So I plug in everything anywhere where I see a variable. Okay, just like the last one, I have multiplication, I have addition, and I have exponent. So I have to take care of my exponent first. Now 3.5 squared is going to give us 12.25. So we rewrite everything else the same way, and make sure you're writing this with me. Except 3.5 squared now is going to be 12.25. Now from here I have both multiplication and addition. So first step, I'm going to do my multiplication. So I'm going to multiply the first set of numbers together, and that's going to give me 219.8. Then I'm going to multiply my second set of numbers together. That gives me 76.93. But I still have addition, so my last step is that I add my two numbers together, and that will give me 296.73. And again, I don't have to round because it's already to the nearest hundredth. So I get 296.73 inches squared. For the next problem, now we're moving on to volume of a cylinder. Now when we find volume of a cylinder, it's a little bit different. We're going to do volume equals pi r squared h. So it's a little bit less work than when we're finding our surface area. There's less to plug in. I can see that my radius is 6 and my height is 8. And pi, just like every other problem, we're using 3.14. So I replace r with 6, I replace h with 8, and pi with 3.14. And again, I have multiplication, I also have exponent, so I have to do the exponent first. 6 squared gives me 36. So I have 3.14 times 36 times 8. Now the last step is I just have to multiply all those numbers together, and when I multiply them out, it gives me 904 0.32 exactly. So again, this time I don't have to round because it's already the nearest hundredth, and my units are going to be centimeters cubed since we're dealing with volume. Our next example, we're doing a similar thing. We're finding the volume of a cylinder, but this time they're giving me the diameter. So since my formula is volume equals pi r squared h, I'm going to have to figure out what the radius is. So if the diameter is 4, that means that the radius is 2. Again, I replace pi with 3.14. I'm going to replace r with 2 for the radius, and h with 6 for the height of the cylinder. And then next step, again, I have to find my exponent first. So we do exponents before multiplication. 2 squared gives me 4, so now I have 3.14 times 4 times 6. Next step, I just have to multiply everything together, and that gives me a volume of 75.36, and my units here are going to be millimeters cubed. Cubed because it's volume. Now the next example, we're moving on to onto a cone. And we know this is a cone because we have one base, and then our lateral surface meets up at one point at the top. So our surface area formula, we do have to find surface area here because it says find surface area. Our surface area formula for a cone is pi r L, where L is our slant height, plus pi r squared. So just like the last few examples, we plug things in where they go. 3 is my radius and 11 is my slant height. That's the diagonal height from the base up to the top point of your cone. And again, we're using 3.14 for pi, so anywhere I see pi, I replace it with 3.14. R I replace with 3. L I replace with 11. And second thing for my second half, so I end up with 3.14 times 3 times 11 plus 3.14 times 3 squared. Again, I have exponents and multiplication. I also have addition in this case, but I have to do exponents first. So very first step, I'm going to take 3 squared to get 9, but I rewrite everything else exactly the same. So 3.14 times 3 times 11 plus 3.14 times 9. Now next step, I see that I have multiplication and addition, so I have to multiply first. My first set of numbers, when I multiply them, it gives me 103.62. And when I multiply my second two numbers, I end up getting 28.26. So now all that I have left to do is add my numbers together. So when I add those together, that gives me 131.88. So my surface area of the cone is 131.88 inches squared. And I don't have to round this also because it's already the nearest hundredth. The next problem is going to look very similar to this, but again, instead of giving us the radius, they're giving us the diameter. So because it's surface area of a cone, we're going to use surface area equals pi r L plus pi r squared. And in this case, since our diameter is 4, our radius is going to be 2. So that's what I'm going to replace r with. So first off, pi again is 3.14. Like we said, r is going to be 2. And my slant height, that diagonal height up the cone, is 6. So I replace each of my variables with the correct number. And then just like the last one, I have an exponent, so I have to do that first. 2 squared gives us 4. So now, everything else looks exactly the same, but I changed 2 squared to 4, and I'm ready to multiply. My first set of numbers, 3.14 times 2 times 6, is going to give me 37.68. My second two numbers gives me 12.56 when I multiply them. And so then I want to add my numbers together, and I get a surface area of 50.24. So we're just doing order of operations once we plug in. And because I'm finding surface area, units are in millimeters squared. Now we're going to move on to finding volume of a cone. So notice it says find the volume of the following figure. I still know that this is a cone. Now volume of a cone is a little bit different than volume of a cylinder. I take 1/3 pi r squared h. And then, just like the other problems, I use 3.14 for pi. I can see that my radius is 2. And then my height, this time we're doing height, not slant height, is 10. Slant height is only used for when we find surface area of a cone, not volume of a cone. Okay, so again, very first thing that I have to deal with is my exponent. 2 squared gives me 4, so I have 1/3, 3.14 times 4 times 10. And then I'm ready to multiply. Now when I take a third of something, really, that's the same as dividing by 3. So I'm going to start off by taking 3.14 times 4 times 10, and then I'm going to divide that by 3, and that gives me 41.86 with the 6 repeating. Now, because I have to round that to the nearest hundredth, I know my next number would be 6, which would bump this up to 41.87. So my answer is 41.87. Since it's volume, it's going to be millimeters cubed. So we have another example of volume of a cone. It says find the volume of the following figure, and this time they're giving us the diameter. So I know that in my formula I need radius, so if the diameter is 6, the radius is half of that, 3, but I'm still plugging in the same formula, volume equals 1/3 pi r squared h. So I start off by plugging in 3.14 for pi. For the radius, I replace it with 3 squared, and then the height is 12. So I start off with my exponent. 3 squared gives me 9, so I have 1/3 times 3.14 times 9 times 12. So once I do my exponent, then I can do a really long line of multiplication. So I start off with 3.14 times 9 times 12, and then divide by 3, and that gives me 113.04. So this case I don't have to round it because it's already to the nearest hundredth, and my units are going to be in inches cubed. So I have 2 more examples, and the 2 examples that we're going to look at have to do with spheres. So the first one's finding surface area of a sphere. And surface area of a sphere is a little bit easier than surface area of anything else because there's just not much going on in the formula. So surface area of a sphere is 4 pi r squared. And all I have to do is replace pi with 3.14 and replace r with 3, since r is our radius. Now just like the other examples, I start off with my exponent, so 3 squared gives me 9. And then I'm taking 4 times 3.14 times 9, and I can do that all at once, and that is going to give me 113.04. And since it's surface area, my units are going to be millimeters squared. So I get 113.04 millimeters squared. For the very last example, it's asking me to find the volume of the sphere, and so this time I'm using my formula volume equals 4/3 pi r cubed. So r is 2 again. We're using 3.14 for pi. And then r, in this case, is 2, so we're taking 2 cubed. And just like the other examples, I start off by taking 2 cubed, which gives me 8. So I get 4/3 times 3.14 times 8. Now in this case, because I have 4/3, I have to do a little bit of fraction math. So I'm going to write my second 2 numbers as fraction, or as fractions over 1. And then I would multiply across the top, and then divide those numbers by 3. And when I do that, that ends up giving me 33.493 repeating, but since I need it rounded to the nearest hundredth, my answer is going to be volume equals 33.49, and my units in this case are inches cubed because I'm dealing with volume.